In the last few days, we have been discussing the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, Vedanta's, India's greatest contribution to the world. Our success depends on how quickly we are able to mobilize our sattvic forces, develop them, strengthen them, establish ourselves in sattva, and eradicate the tamas, reduce the rajas in our personalities. Unless we address this issue, we are not going to be able to be successful in the world, much less successful in our spiritual pursuits. So let's take a closer look at what these three gunas are. Sattva is the highest, the best. A sattvic person, or when you are in sattva, you are a visionary, a contemplator, a leader. One of the most important attributes of a leader is that he or she must be established in sattva. And every one of us is a leader in some way or the other. We are leaders in our family, we are leaders in society, we are leaders in our organizations perhaps, we are leaders in some aspect or the other. And therefore it's incumbent on us to make an attempt to identify our sattvic content and provide an environment that is conducive to the development of this sattva. What is this sattva? It's a state of serenity, calm, where you are in contemplation of the higher. So first of all, you must stretch your imagination, stretch your resources to accommodate the thought of the transcendental, something beyond the world. And then make an attempt to strive to achieve it. Whether you achieve it or not is not the point. The very effort, the very attempt puts you in a sattvic state of mind. A spiritual seeker, a sattvic person, often fails to find appropriate words to describe his or her continuing pursuit of the transcendental. To the outward eye, there may be no material occupation, there may be no gainful employment, there may be no meaningful contribution to society either. Yet, the very fact that he is serene, the very fact that he is in inward contemplation of the higher, gives him a power, gives him a strength that no other individual has. And Indian society, ancient Indian society, understood the value of this. In the 4th chapter of the Gita, Krishna says, gives 4 different kinds of dhanam that you do, charity that you do. And the 4 different kinds are dravya yajna, you give wealth; tapo yajna, you give your effort; yoga yajna, you give your mind and intellect, knowledge, feelings. But the highest, he says, is svadhyaya jnana yajna, means self-study. And as a French thinker said, and so while others miserably pledge themselves to the pursuit of ambition and brief power, I will be stretched out in the shade singing. When he describes it like this, it's not an indifferent, lazy state. It is a superactive state. The activity is at such a subtle level that it is imperceptible to the outside world. And yet, it is people like this who have contributed maximum to society. So, sattva is the state of serenity. Yes, the world makes demands on you. And yes, you have obligations in the world to perform. But a sattvic person does what he has to do, performs his obligations to perfection, completely. But as soon as it is over, he quickly comes back to the thought of Atman. It's like a bee. A bee has homing instincts that allow the bee to go out in search of food all over the place. And the moment the bee gets the food, instantly it finds its way back home. Similarly, our home is Atman. You may go out into the world like you leave your homes and go out every morning, but every evening you come back. You don't stay put somewhere else. Similarly, your thought leaves you, leaves Atman, goes out into the world, but it must quickly come back as soon as your obligation is over. But that's not what we do. First of all, there is no recognition, acknowledgement of obligation, duty. And what we do is we chase objects of desire. And once you're there, you get further embroiled in desire-ridden activity, and there's no recognition of the fact that you have to get back. A sattvic person has absolute clarity of thought, comes back. The next mediocre state is that of rajas. Rajas is the state of activity that is combined with agitation, passionate, agitated, excited pursuit of objects of desire. Such people are implementers, administrators, managers, supervisors, but they are not the leaders. They cannot be because they don't have that vision. Even though a rajasic person acts, that action is marred by selfishness, polluted by selfishness. And therefore you can't, everything you do will be polluted with some kind of inefficiency, some kind of mistake, some fault in that activity. And therefore you will not function to your optimum capacity. Tamas is the state of lethargy. It's a comatose condition. However talented you may be, however skilled or intelligent you may be, if there is a blanketing by tamas of all your resources, of all your abilities, it's no use. All of us are like that. Everyone is born in the world to excel. But how many of us actually achieve that state of excellence? Most of us live and die without so much as a glimpse of what our abilities are, what our potential is, and what we have to contribute to the world and to ourselves. Why does this happen? Because of sheer lethargy, sloth, indifference, care-a-hang attitude. I don't care what happens. In the state of tamas, you don't care what happens to others, of course, but you don't even care what happens to yourself. Many of us, a lot of the time, are in this state. So therefore, based on these three gunas, the ancient thinkers categorized society into 4 castes, varnas. These 4 castes are Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. This classification is based not on birth, but on the composition of sattva, rajas and tamas in our system. So as you can see here, Brahmanas, the highest, the noblest, the best quality of a human being. The Brahmanas were predominantly sattvic in nature. They had just enough rajas to keep them going and traces of tamas. Kshatriyas, on the other hand, were predominantly rajasic. Their sattvic content went down and tamas crept in. Vaishyas, business class, Sattvic content went down still further and tamas increased. And Shudras are predominantly tamasic in nature. This categorization was done not to put down a certain category of people and endow Brahmanas with certain privileges. This is abuse of the caste system. The caste system was put in place to help every single individual, no matter what caste he or she belongs to rise to the highest level of perfection. So, depending on one's nature, the field of activity was given, a field of activity conducive to the nature of the person was given in such a way that every one of us, whether we are Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas or Shudras, could put in effort and rise to the highest perfection. This compassionate categorization, this inclusion of every single member of society has not been there in any other country except here. And yet, somehow or the other, with the passage of time, we succeeded in destroying this caste system completely, misunderstanding it. And this happened because the Brahmanas claimed certain privileges to themselves. Any class, any category, any group of people, any individual that decides to claim privileges without contributing to society gets destroyed. And this is what happened to the Brahmanas. But before this, as society degraded, you see, the world follows a cyclical pattern. You get to the top and then you come down. And as the deterioration set in, the thinkers of the time decided to isolate the Brahmanas, isolate the sattvic content of society so that they may be able to help the rest of society to pull themselves up. And that worked for a while. But then even that failed. And thus, we are in this present state. What is needed is to resurrect sattva in ourselves, in society, and bring into being what is known, what we call as the sattvic life model. Not just sattvic business model, but sattvic life model. There must be a conscious effort to develop this sattvic content, create an environment that is conducive for development of sattva. In schools, in colleges, in organizations, in government bodies, everywhere. That's all that's needed. Once you do that, everything else falls in place. But if sattva falls and you have everything else, it's no use. That's what we are trying to do. We are trying to develop IT professionals, doctors, lawyers, this, that and the other. We have intelligence. We have so many plus points. But minus sattva, it'll all amount to naught. So, this is what he's talking about in this chapter. Karma yoga is dependent on how much you are able to develop this sattva through action. Purify your system of selfishness. Please remember, every single human being has all three. But the rest of the world, the Western world in particular, doesn't even understand the concept of sattva. Nor do we, for that matter. But at least it's there in our texts, in our scriptures. How many of us are aware of what are our sattvic qualities? What are our rajasic qualities? Where is this base and disgusting tamasic quality in us? How does it manifest? Having understood this, how many of us know how to deal with it? Tamas should be dealt with on a war footing. Declare war on your own tamas. There's only one way of eradicating tamas. Just crush it. Punish it. Eradicate it. Rajas must be kept alive. Activity must be kept alive. And sattva must be encouraged on an urgent basis. There's no time to waste. You have to encourage it. One of the things that you need to remember is these three qualities surface within our personality at three distinct times of the day. Sattva surfaces in our personality between 4 and 6 a.m. I repeat, between 4 and 6 in the morning. How many of us see the light of day before 6 a.m., particularly in winter when it's cold and dark? Not even in summer. That being the case, how can you expect your sattvic content to be developed? Rajas comes to the surface between sunrise and sunset. And tamas comes up after sundown. All indulgent activities, all negative activities, all the worst in you comes up after sundown. And what are we doing? We are not allowing the sattva to surface at all. Rajas willy-nilly goes on, and tamas is positively encouraged. Late nights, parties, etc. Even in America, they don't have late nights during the week. If you go there and find what an average citizen does, they don't have late nights. They don't party all night through during the week. Yes, weekend perhaps. But here, every day is party time. So therefore, that awareness must be there. Once you become aware, some attempt must be made to resurrect, rejuvenate your personality, re-energize your personality with sattva. What a wonderful state it is. How can you describe the quiet moments of your life? And yet it is these quiet, serene, calm moments that sustain your life, that enable you to meet with the challenges, to meet with all the disturbances and agitations that you go through. If the sattvic content comes down below a certain level, it's an alarming sign. So, make an effort. Understand what sattva is. The 18th chapter of the Gita gives a full description of your personality. How does sattva manifest? How does tamas manifest? How does rajas manifest in your personality? So therefore you need knowledge. If you have the knowledge already, knowledge means in terms of books or cassettes or whatever it is, read it. Reflect over it. Try and implement it, put it in your life. If you don't have it, help yourself to it. You know there are outside on the counter, the cassette, CDs, etc. available. There's knowledge available galore. What is missing is the will, the urge, the desire to improve ourselves. That's important. Once you have it, the rest follows automatically. So, sattva, rajas, tamas. To establish yourself in sattva is the greatest service that you can do to yourself and to society around you. Now we'll continue with verse 23.
Yadi hyaham navarteyam jatu karmanyatandritaha mama vartmanu vartante manushya partha sarvashaha.
O Partha, if I did not act tirelessly, people would follow my example in all respects. He continues with the emotional support system. And since he has not reacted, since Arjuna has not reacted to devotion, persuasion, a boost as a leader or inspiration, Krishna now turns the heat on. And now in this verse, he instills fear in Arjuna. He says, "O Partha, if I did not act tirelessly, atandritaha, people would follow my example in all respects, and the assumption is that there'd be chaos." So, an emotional person will react to it. A rational person will say, "Fine, you want to act, you act. That doesn't mean I have to act." But this is an emotional appeal, and all put together, they work with Arjuna. So in this case, he says he instills fear. It's like sometimes the mother, when the child is not behaving himself, the mother says, "Look, I'll stop doing things. I'll stop doing things for you." And then it works. You're instilling fear. That's what he's doing. Krishna knows that Arjuna is dependent on him, and he's using this tactic to get him to act. And even this doesn't work, so the final emotional weapon that he has is threat, which comes in the next verse, 24.
उत्सीदेयुरिमे लोकाः न कुर्यां कर्म चेदहम् संकरस्य च कर्ता स्याम् उपहन्यामि मा प्रजाः.
If I were not to act, these worlds would be destroyed. I would cause chaos in society and ruin these people. This verse this is the final threat that Krishna gives, and obviously it works because then he moves on from the next verse onwards to a different topic altogether. He speaks about what is right action. But this threat works. The threat is, if I were to stop acting, these worlds would perish because I am the one who is supporting it. So this verse can be interpreted in two ways. To the devotional person, a devotee believes that God maintains everything, God supports everything, God protects all beings. And if God stops protecting, then the whole world will come to an end. This is a simple devotional interpretation of this verse. But the intellectual interpretation is that Atman is that divine power that supports all laws, is the lawgiver, the governor, the commander of all the laws that are functioning in the world. For instance, the law of gravity functions meticulously because there is an ordainer that has put the law in place. Chemical laws, biological laws, physical laws, all kinds of laws, external laws have been put in place by this divine power, Atman. If Atman were to switch off, these laws would go into confusion. Some laws would function, some laws would not function, and then there'd be chaos. Also, Atman is the ordainer, the governor of internal laws. Internal laws are the laws of sattva, rajas, tamas, the law of karma. That every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's because of these internal laws that there is perfect justice in the world. Next verse, 25.
सक्ता कर्मण्य विद्वांसः यथा कुर्वन्ति भारत कुर्याद्विद्वांस्तथा सक्तः चिकीर्षुर्लोकसङ्ग्रहम्.
As the unwise, avidvansah, attached to action, act, O Bharata, so should the wise act without attachment, seeking lokasangraham, the well-being of the world. These 11 verses, verses 25 to 35, deal with what is right action. And he gets into this because obviously the emotional threat that he has issued in the previous verse, verse 24, has had an impact on Arjuna, and he has shown signs of willingness to act. So therefore he says, now education moves, it must start with what is known to you and then slowly take you to the unknown. What is known to Arjuna, what is known to all of us is attachment to action. We are all attached to action. So he says, as the unwise, all of us, act attached to action.